Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, How to Control Your Data in an Unpredictable Environment. We are going to get started here in about 30 seconds. I see that people are still filtering in, and I'd like to give everybody just a few more moments. So hang on, and we'll get started here in about 30 seconds. Thank you. All right, looks like people are still joining, but let's get rolling. Again, welcome everyone. Today's webinar, How to Control Your Data in an Unpredictable Environment, an exploration of the key factors driving adoption of enterprise storage as a service. And I'm pleased that today's webinar will include presentation of data and analysis from IDC. We are excited about what we're seeing in the market, and I think that this will be an enjoyable and educational session today. Let's dive right in. I'm happy to be joined by Andrew Smith, Research Manager at IDC. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Greg. Thank you for having me.
Glad to be with you. I'm Greg Newman, Vice President at Zadara. Andrew, you and I have had a chance to talk and spend some time together recently. I've really enjoyed our conversations. I feel like every time we get together, I learn something new, and I think today's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. Let's jump in. In fact, here's the agenda, folks. We have a little bit of uncertainty in our lives. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. What is driving adoption of storage as a service, also known as STaaS? Boy, Andrew, talk about an acronym. that one's a mouthful. Well, that's nothing you can do about it, I guess. Enterprise control, cloud agility. You know, that really sort of sums up, I think, the goal for a lot of folks, and we'll take a look at what that means. And then we're going to leave some time for Q&A. So those of you that have questions, please do be sure to put them into the questions panel. I'm sure everybody on this webinar by this point has become familiar with how the GoToWebinar software works. We've all been on more than a few webinars, certainly in the last 6 months. And so please do use the panel. And we will get to those questions at the end. Andrew, by the way, I did prepare a couple of polls. You and I didn't get a chance to speak about those. I'm going to try to insert those at a couple of points in the middle of this presentation. And let's learn a little something from our attendees. How's that sound?
Yeah, that would be great.
Cool. All right, let's get going. Before we jump in, let me take a moment, because I'm the marketing guy and I can't help myself. I want to at least explain a little bit to people on this webinar who Zadara is. If you have not heard of us before, I can tell you that we've been around for 10 years, and we are a worldwide company serving government agencies and enterprises from all different industries. Here's a small selection of some logos we're proud to be associated with, and there are many, many more, of course. We will talk a little bit later about what we do for a living here at Zadara, but for now I wanted everybody to know a little bit about who we are. And of course, I don't imagine there's anybody on the planet that doesn't know who IDC is, but Andrew, please tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, this is a quick intro to IDC slide. Obviously a market research firm focusing on multiple technology sectors, and my team, I'm on IDC's infrastructure team, so we cover everything from compute, storage, networking, whether it's deployed on premises or in the cloud. And my focus is specifically on that infrastructure side, so storage and compute in the cloud and on premises.
Nice, thank you. I know we have a good lineup today you prepared for us, and please walk us through. Tell us what we're going to see.
Sure. So my overall goal today is kind of to leave everyone with a better understanding of what storage as a service is, first and foremost, why it matters, and then give you some relevant data points that you might find helpful for either your organization's specific use case or a business case that you're developing. And then we also want to tie this back to kind of current events, how it's relevant in the market today, some of the short and long-term impacts we're seeing regarding cloud infrastructure and storage as a service, especially in the context of COVID-19. So that's kind of, those are that at the high level, that's what I'd like to go through today.
Excellent.
So
And you know, it's a point I should have made earlier. This is very much going to be a strategic discussion. If you showed up here thinking this was going to be a how-to or nuts and bolts, that webinar is down the hall. We're not doing that one today. So I hope that everybody will get something out of this. This is very much about understanding the business drivers. And you made a great quote, Andrew, and I thought it's terrific that it's on the slide here. Data really is an asset these days, isn't it? I mean, this is how people should be thinking about it if they're not already.
agreed, right? It's more and more there's initiatives, whether they're part of a kind of at the enterprise level, at the executive level, to generate more value from data, and there's more perceived value to be pulled from data than ever before, and that's a challenge that's front and center to many enterprises today.
Exactly. Well, let's keep going here because I think you've teed it up perfectly. A lot of folks ask right at the outset, what is enterprise storage as a service? You've given us a good definition.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, from an IDC perspective, we're a firm that prides ourselves on defining and sizing markets, and we actually don't have a specific definition of enterprise storage as a service, because it's one of those things where you kind of know it when you see it, but it's an amalgamation of different technologies and different services, which kind of makes it so unique and applicable to so many use cases. So, but we've kind of come up with a little bit of a checklist to help you kind of know STAS when you see it. One is it can be delivered on premises or in the cloud. There isn't kind of a requirement either way, but one of the requirements is it's based on a consumption-based or an OpEx model, right? You're not paying for a system or hardware upfront. And typically that kind of flexible subscription-based billing has a consumption aspect to it, where you're paying for the resources you use and you're not paying for the resources you don't use. So as you scale up, you pay more. As you scale down, you pay less. That ties into the flexibility of the solution in terms of cost and scale. You can add capacity on demand. You can reduce capacity. That goes for compute too, as some of the services that are adjacent to the platform might require that. And the broader services ecosystem, you might be able to add an analytics application and turn it on and off as you need it, or a security application, turn it on and off as you need it. That can all fall under the umbrella of a storage as a service platform. Non-disruptive upgrades. This is important, right? You're not ripping things out and replacing them with the next level of system or the upgrade of a system. Same with the hardware, same with the software. There aren't really tiered versions that you need to upgrade to, right? This is kind of it's all part of the subscription-based service where you're expecting service upgrades and performance upgrades as you go. The last one on this list is kind of the shared risk aspect. The partnership that you're getting with the SaaS provider, right? They're also giving you a certain level of availability, accessibility of the platform, SLAs in terms of how much your data will be available, any data loss that goes along with it. That's unique to this kind of as a service delivery model, right? You're not completely responsible for the entire ecosystem yourself. You can rely on your provider. And one thing that's not on this, but I just kind of, it summarizes all of these, is storage as a service. It delivers that cloud-like experience. And again, what is a cloud-like experience? It's it's the experience that customers, enterprise buyers are increasingly coming to expect, where you're getting that flexible consumption, you're getting the upgrades over time, you're able to share risk with the services provider. That is all kind of under that umbrella. So that's kind of one way to think about this. Does it deliver that cloud-like experience? And we would expect storage as a service to do that.
Yes, it's true that people are coming to expect that kind of experience, and I'm really glad you mentioned risk, Andrew, because there's a lot of folks we talk to. Again, we've been doing this a long time, who are reluctant to embrace a discussion of risk. It's a scary topic for sure, but when you do, and when you really examine the risks that you take in your IT organization, you can make better decisions about how you want to shift that risk, and it's going to be a different answer for different organizations. I did get a question here. I'm going to try to weave questions in as we go, by the way. So anybody that has questions, we're certainly going to answer questions at the end, but to the extent that I can, I will attempt to answer them as we go, because it could be relevant to the slide we're on. I got a question here about, please clarify what you mean as in the cloud. Do you mean, I think the question here, what they're getting to is, do you mean private storage at the cloud edge? You know, we're gonna touch on this in a little bit more detail later. But Andrew, this is an interesting question, don't you think? That people have.
Yeah, it is. It's a great question. I mean, from an IDC perspective, we get pretty granular on how we think about cloud and how we segment cloud. It could be private, public, hosted, managed. I think in the context of this presentation, we mean either private or public. That's kind of the easiest way, I think, to keep it at a high level. It could be delivered, it could be multi-tenant, or it could be single tenant, but it is still that cloud experience where you're essentially, you're not buying a system, you're purchasing a service and you're billed for it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's keep moving because we got a lot of good stuff to get through. This slide, I think, just nails the environment we're all living in today.
Yeah. So as an analyst, it's kind of our duty to start off with some a little bit of the scary story, right? A little bit of a call to action. But this is kind of I think what the dynamic that many organizations are faced with, which is shrinking IT budgets and pretty relentless data growth. So what our research pretty consistently shows that organizations say that they expect their storage growth to expand 30 to 40% annually. And this is backed up. IDC has two pretty large studies. One is called the Data Sphere, and then a related study called the Storage Sphere. Data Sphere being all the data created kind of in the world conceptually, and Storage Sphere is how much of that data is actually stored. All right, what's the install base? So that's kind of how we look at data and storage overall. And those that research also kind of backs up this 30 to 40% growth rate. So I guess the question is, looking at the illustrative graph, how is this going to work? How is it sustainable?
Right.
And it's interesting in today's context too, because one of the main hypotheses of the data sphere is that the current macroeconomic conditions and COVID-19, and we'll get into this more later, it's not slowing this rate of data growth down. If anything, it's accelerating it, because organizations have to shift to more digital operating models. You kind of have a proliferation of devices outside the enterprise, what would typically be the campus or the physical location. You have more collaboration being done online than ever before. So really, we don't expect this trend to change significantly in the current conditions, which kind of continues to beg the question, how do we deal with this?
Yeah, exactly. And I think everybody's experiencing this to one degree or another. It occurs to me, well, let me launch one of our polls here. I think I'd like to gather some info. I'm going to put this up on the screen for everybody to respond to. Please take a moment And I'm gonna read the question out. What are your top 3 pain points? I typed in for cloud storage. Andrew, I'm gonna be honest, I made a mistake. It should say data storage there. For all of you, it happens, I'm only human. All of you out there, please do respond to this question if you can take a moment. And tell us what your top 3 pain points are for data storage, not just in the cloud, but generally. And that way we can gather a little info here. We can all get a little smarter, and that'll help guide our conversation as well as we go forward. All right, it is in progress. We've got folks voting now, and I'm going to give it just a few seconds longer. Okay. You're going to have to pick your top one. So let's see. This is I asked you to pick 3, but it looks like it wants you to pick 1. So this is going to be interesting. It makes it a tougher choice, doesn't it? Now you got to pick your top one. I don't know which one. What would I pick? I'd probably go with data capacity and growth, like you've been talking about. There's no question that's just a tough nut to crack. All right, let's wrap it up.
All these are good choices.
Yeah, they are, right? And you know, this comes out of course of what we've all been seeing and what we've been researching. So they're all choices we've encountered before, conversations we've had before, and I'm sure everybody on this has had before as well. That you know, these are issues we're finding. So I'm going to close it out here, and let's check out where we landed. I'm going to share the results on our screen here momentarily. Here it comes. Look at that, 35% on the data capacity, and then the cost. Yeah. What do you think, Andrew? I think that's
really interesting. This is I'm going to try and keep this in mind as we get a couple slides down, because we actually have a slide on where we see customers considering the cost and the kind of flexibility in terms of scaling of cloud storage versus other elements. You know, what's valuable, what's valuable in terms of the platform. So that's definitely interesting.
Cool. Well, let's do that. Let's keep moving. Now we're talking about storage in the cloud, like you've been referring to. Talk to us about this. This is an interesting chart.
Yeah. So the question we're left with from the previous slide is, how do we deal with that dynamic of growing capacity and shrinking IT budgets? And really, one way that a lot of enterprises are dealing with it is by moving their storage budgets to the cloud, or increasing their budgets for cloud-based storage. So I like this graph a lot because it helps illustrate that dynamic. So at the bar, or excuse me, the line on top is the growth of what we consider kind of the traditional external storage market. The lighter blue line below that is the growth of the public cloud storage market. And this just kind of shows that over time, since 2015, you can see kind of the continued accelerated, the high pace of growth of the public cloud storage market compared to the relatively flat growth of the traditional market. So it shows you how important the cloud storage market has become in a relatively short amount of time. And that leads us to kind of, you know, we're constantly thinking about what's the forecast for the next 3 to 5 years. And we've stated that by 2023, we expect more than 40% of the world's data to be stored in hyperscale cloud data centers, right? Continuing to see capacity grow in cloud ecosystems.
That doesn't seem far-fetched at all, given the growth we're seeing. The numbers are showing us that just absolutely trending in that direction.
Right. And this is the essential ingredient to storage as a service, to cloud storage, right? It's this capacity in the cloud. This is what makes it possible to move that data and then build kind of an ecosystem of storage services around it.
Exactly. Now this is you know, public cloud storage in your chart here, and we'll talk a little bit later about public cloud versus private cloud, and again, trying to get that enterprise storage experience, but in a cloud model, and how achievable that is. But like we've talked about before, and I think we'll get into a little bit later in more detail. You know, different workloads have different requirements. There are different answers, in other words, depending on your needs. And there's no one size fits all, is there, for data storage?
Right.
So here are some of the factors driving public cloud infrastructure as a service.
Yeah, so this relates to your poll. So we know that we just kind of looked at the revenue statistics in terms of how the market is growing, but you can dig a little bit deeper into that in terms of, well, why? Why is it growing? This kind of is a great summary slide of the top 3 factors buyers have chosen that drive their use of public cloud IaaS. So I've highlighted at the top, I've highlighted performance and security, and really I probably could have highlighted the top 4, so to include global reach and access to adjacent services. And I've highlighted ease of scaling and better TCO than alternatives at the bottom to contrast that. So the dynamic I want to highlight here is relates to that poll. A lot of times the initial use case for cloud storage is cost and scale related. And that has led to the kind of double-digit growth that you've seen in this market, right? It can be extremely cost effective and it can scale extremely well. But more and more as we've, and this, I should probably note, this data is from IDC's IaaS view, and we've done this for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is we've actually seen cost and scale slowly move down the list, and things like performance and security have slowly moved up the list. So what it indicates to us is kind of a continued maturation of the market where customers jump in for initial use cases around cost, and then they continue to kind of mature their development by adopting adjacent services, continuing to expand their footprint globally alongside their services provider. But I think it gives you a good sense of kind of the longevity of the market too, as customers continue to rely on their provider for more services, and the continued growth of the market would indicate that, you know, providers are delivering successfully on those.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, and it relates to, I think it's interesting to look at the poll, right?
Mm-hmm.
The poll shows that cost and scaling are still very important to some of those. Maybe it's an initial use case or an ongoing use case, especially given the current environment. But I think if you look out 3 to 5 years, it's those adjacent services that are going to continue to generate the most net new value for this market.
Yeah, it's a good point about the adjacent services. There, of course, are challenges associated with public cloud, and we should acknowledge them. No surprise, some of the things on this list look a little bit like the things in our poll, and the concerns and the pain points that people have.
Yeah. So it's, you know, everything is not great. It's important to look at the market and acknowledge the challenges associated with public cloud IaaS and cloud storage in general. Typically, they center around security and performance, and then the third, you know, you have cost and billing showing up too. I think a lot of the cost and billing challenges are typically just around the complexity
Mm-hmm.
that some platforms can generate, right? And you've seen some enterprises have to rely on a third party just to understand their billing, whereas other services providers are better at keeping that billing simple and straightforward. But it's also just a shift in, I think a lot of that has to do with the shift in delivery models, right? You're going from a CapEx to an OpEx-based system. You're not necessarily, enterprises aren't necessarily used to kind of managing that consistent billing on a month-to-month or year-to-year basis over time, and that can be disruptive in the short term. But around security and performance, these are challenges, again, associated with moving from on-prem to off-prem too, where your enterprise IT might be used to kind of handling everything about provisioning storage, monitoring and managing storage, and all of a sudden you're shifting to a service where the majority of that is managed for you. And there's going to be questions around, well, what's the availability? What's the resilience of the platform? What, you know, is it highly available? What's the encryption? These are all things that pose challenges, I think, to initial adoption. But as from what we've seen, following the market closely, is these are areas where providers are pretty consistently focused and dedicated to continuing to develop continuing to spend resources and R&D in terms of really bringing their security and performance capabilities up to enterprise grade. And I think I'll pause there. I'll stop talking.
No, this is good. I was thinking as you were talking about the availability of tools and software. We've encountered that quite a bit here at Zadara as well. And what we hear from customers, it's very simple, which is, look, I just need a steering wheel. I need you to be able to give me a way to control my storage, even though it may be hosted remotely or hosted on your servers. And we have over 300 points of presence around the world. I may want to host it somewhere else. It's not in my own data center, but I sure want to be able to control it like it's in my data center. And that was something very early on we recognized and have built out tools and software to allow them to manage it just like they would manage a local array. And we're not the only ones doing that, I think, but I think we're particularly good at it because we have such a long history doing it. And so there's that notion of trade-offs again, right? The notion of, gee, I really want it all. How can I get it all? And it's not easy in enterprise storage. Enterprise storage is a complex thing.
Yeah, and I think, one last comment is that I think there's some applications, some workloads that are never going to be efficient for cloud, right? Whether it's a security or a compliance requirement, enterprises are going to need complete control over that. But the trend in the market is, to your point, services providers are continuing to tackle these challenges, whether on an application or a workload basis, and kind of make the transition a reality, right? Make it to where the storage is secure enough, the application is secure enough and available enough to be able to be hosted. So it's kind of a continued, these are hurdles, but so far we haven't seen anything where the market was unable to kind of overcome what the use case was or the challenges the use case presented.
Right, exactly. I agree. I think it's been an interesting ride the last few years. There's been a lot of wonderful advances in development. It occurred to me I wanted to launch another poll, Andrew, and so I'm going to do that. It's nice to do it on the back of that last slide. So before we dive into this slide on data resilience, let's take a look at what people have to say about looking ahead and where they're going to store their data. And this obviously is tough to forecast, but please take a moment, think about what your plans look like today, and where you think you're going to be in a couple of years. I'm guessing, and I don't think this is a huge, this is not a huge leap, that everybody knows we live in a hybrid world these days, Andrew, and that's not going to change, is it?
No.
We talked earlier about different workloads have different requirements. I think everybody has to be prepared for the idea that you're gonna have an organization that is spread across a few different locations and different operating environments and different operating conditions. All right, we've got people voting right now. We're going to give it a little bit longer. Please get your vote in. We want to make sure it gets counted. And then we'll post the results here in just a moment. All right, still going up. People are still thinking about it. Yep. All right, I'm going to close it out here momentarily. Here we go. Oh, nope, I'm getting some last minute folks. Hang on.
Okay.
Sid. There we go. All right, now we're closing it. Here we go. Let's check out the results. Let's see where we're at.
All the above.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have to say it. I thought it would be rude to forecast it out loud, but yeah, that's where it's at. No surprise. And that's okay. The point here is, let's acknowledge the world we live in, and let's understand the challenges that are associated with living in that world, and let's address them. And so I think we can see fairly clearly there's a hybrid and an all of the above really dominating the results.
Yeah, and I think that's, to your point, that's the reality, and it creates significant opportunity, and at the same time it creates significant challenges. I mean, if you're a IT admin or a storage admin, and you look at all of the above, then the immediate question is, oh, here we go. We're going to have to manage all this effectively. How do we do that?
Yeah, and I think that leads us, in my opinion, this is a super important topic. I was so glad you prepared this slide, Andrew, because if we're living in that world that we've just described, we need to know that our data is going to be secure and it's going to be available. Talk to us about what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, so this is kind of the core, from the previous slide. If some of the key challenges are around security and performance, how do I, as a buyer or as a practitioner, how do I stop that from, making the case, creating the business case, or to do a migration or an implementation? And really what we advise is talking about, viewing this through the lens of IT resilience or data resilience. There's a couple, so let's start with the stats on the slide to kind of put things into context. So this is from recent research we've done over the past 2 years, again, end user related survey data. And from that survey, we see that over 90% of organizations have experienced a tech-related business destruction in the past 2 years, and approximately 50 have experienced an unrecoverable data loss event in the past 3 years. Many of these were due to kind of targeted to malicious attacks, whether it was ransomware or malware. But I think the point is, regardless of deployment type, there's still security concerns, data loss concerns. So how do you start to think about improving IT resilience and data resilience in the current macroeconomic condition? And one way to do that, especially if part of your mandate is to move to cloud or consider cloud services, is to ask the services provider these types of questions, right? How does your platform enable IT resilience or data resilience? What kind of data protection features, security features are built in or optional parts of the platform? Is there high availability? What are the durability SLAs? What are the availability SLAs? All of that relates, in a way, these are all critical components of a storage as a service solution. And they're really kind of, I think the expectation today has to be that these are built in, and in partnership with the storage as a service platform, you can kind of, a buyer should be able to count on having an infrastructure environment that is resilient. I think that's the key point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that resiliency has probably always been on the minds. It's always something that has been considered by IT, but it's just never been more important. And like you say, it's not just because of the hybrid world we live in, and maybe you're deploying in a cloud environment, but because of the threats that we face. Even when our data are stored on-prem, it's just a tough world out there right now, and you need to keep this top of mind, whatever your storage stack looks like. Speaking of threats, we've had an interesting run the last 6 months. It's no joke. It's been a very serious time for all of us, and we're seeing the impact of COVID-19. Talk about this, Andrew. What you're seeing out there in terms of what an inflection point this is really becoming.
Yeah, keeping IT and data resilience in mind. I think if there was ever a burning platform, so to speak, to make the business case for IT resilience, it would be COVID-19 and kind of what the challenge that enterprises are faced with today. So this kind of puts it all into perspective, and IDC's tracked kind of IT sentiment since, I think, March. We started putting out our first surveys, and I have some data from the most recent, so we do it monthly. I have some data from the most recent survey blast, which was in July. So one of the questions we ask is around spending in general, and what we've typically seen is around 60%, in this case 66%, expect their IT spending to be flat to declining in 2020. 31% expect their IT spending to grow. However, when you drill down into this, right? So IT spending is kind of the umbrella, and then we ask about specific segments within that spending bucket.
Mhm.
Almost 70% expect their private cloud spending to be flat or to increase, and 67% expect their public cloud spending to be flat or increase. So you have these pockets of growth or pockets of resilience in spending within the overall IT spending bucket.
Mm.
Um, and that brings us to the graph on the right, which is our forecast for public cloud storage. And we just put this out a couple weeks ago. And to be frank, we received a lot of criticism, both internally and externally, when we were
Really?
updating this when we were updating this forecast in light of COVID-19, because I think in many technology sectors, especially the traditional ones, you expect to see a dip in 2020 in your forecast, and rightly so, because overall IT spending is forecast to decline, right? So how is that going to play out in specific markets? And we kind of push back, and counterintuitively, we forecast the market to continue growing at this, pretty robust double-digit rate. And you can see it results in a pretty consistent growth rate over the forecast period. And it's this consistent growth was exactly what began to generate a lot of questions. But I think really the survey data helps back this up, right? That there are pockets of continued spending and growth despite COVID-19 and the challenges it brings. And I think it's a justification to show how important infrastructure services are as organizations plan their recovery and kind of emerge into whatever you want to call it, their new way of doing business or their new normal.
Yep.
I think that it's indicative that organizations are willing to kind of evaluate a new solution or continue to rely on their cloud services provider as they reevaluate their budgets, reevaluate their skill sets. So this is kind of, taking the IT resilience and the data resilience theme into consideration, then taking current events into consideration. Overall, I think it's important to realize how critical infrastructure services are to the current condition and to the current recovery that many organizations are going through.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting that you got some pushback. I will tell you, we're on the front lines of this stuff, and we're seeing that COVID-19 has absolutely been an accelerator in the process, a catalyst in the equation, if you will, right? In the process of transforming the approach, right? We said this is going to be a strategic talk today, and this is, I think, at the heart of it, which is, what is your strategy around data storage and management? And people are really rethinking it at a strategic level, and so it's no surprise, because this is what we're seeing as well, is that they are turning to different methods and different ways of solving the storage problem. And these are, this is a radical departure for some organizations that are used to deploying storage on-prem and managing it all themselves. But the benefits are becoming clear. I think we've reached that point where everybody has had some experience with the public cloud, maybe with certain workloads, and now they're seeing that their benefits are real, and they're embracing it more fully, intelligently. I want to be clear, and we'll talk a little bit later about how people are working with us and how they get started. But we've seen a real shift in the last 6 months in terms of really embracing more wholeheartedly the strategy of deploying in a hybrid world, regardless of the actual deployment method that an individual company might choose. I appreciate that. It's interesting, because I don't think that the COVID-19 situation is that anybody expected it to be quite as long-lasting and quite as impactful, but it's had a real impact. I want to shift gears, Andrew, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge that everything we've just been talking about is designed to provide a picture of the world. It's a world that is dominated by loads more uncertainty than we've ever seen before. And look, uncertainty has always been a part of the equation, right? There's no question that when you're operating in IT, with the pace of change and the big bets that you have to make traditionally, you've always had to deal with uncertainty. The level of uncertainty brought on by the amount of data growth, brought on by things like COVID-19, it's just unsustainable. I wouldn't want to be making the kind of traditional bets that you have to make in order to purchase and manage a traditional IT stack. And I think you've given us a very good view of that in terms of the actual data and the actual market conditions, what's happening out there. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to turn to a little bit of what Zadara does. How do we provide an answer to that? And I'll keep it fairly brief, but I want to refer back to some of the things you had to say in your talk, because I think that those points really resonate. We are a service company, and storage as a service has the word services in it right there. We take that very seriously. I'm not a founding member of this company. This company's been around about 10 years, but the founding members of this company, all storage pros, boy, did they nail it. They absolutely got it right. They saw what was coming, and they built a company based on software-defined storage hardware, commodity hardware, and proprietary software that could allow for a single tenant experience in a multi-tenant model, thus providing enterprise-grade performance and security, together with a cloud-based experience in terms of billing, paying only for usage. You can deploy it anywhere. We actually ship hardware all over the world, and then we manage it for you 24/7. We have teams on 4 different continents, so the sun never sets on Zadara, we like to say, to borrow a phrase. This is the approach that we recommend, whether you choose Zadara or not. We recommend that you keep these things in mind as you look around and you decide for yourself and for your organization what you think you need in terms of a storage as a service partner. And there's a very simple reason for that. I thought I would include this chart. You showed us some nice charts, Andrew, and I think a chart can sometimes tell a story a lot better than words can. And I think it's pretty obvious in this chart. We've all experienced this. Anybody who's had to provision storage before knows exactly what this means. You over provision. It happens. You have to. And you do that, you end up spending a bunch of money that you really would hope to avoid spending if you can. And now, frankly, you can, thanks to the SaaS model. So the impact to your organization may vary depending on the size of your operation, but nevertheless, as a percentage, it's going to be a significant part of your budget. And so keep in mind what your over provisioning impact looks like. Calculate that as you look to calculate your ROI on a SaaS investment. And I think you'll see that when you look at a vendor like Zadara, because of the way we structure our storage, the way we in fact manage it over time, and the upgrades that we provide, seamless by the way, your cost per gigabyte, your cost to store that same data goes down over time, which is why you see a departure in the green line from the blue. You really do get to see some incredible benefits by making an investment with a storage partner. What does it mean? This kind of gets to the heart of it, and I put the slide in here just to give people a sense of what is it you do, Zadara. What do I get when I go with Zadara? Well, what you get is you get a fully managed enterprise data cloud, and what that means is that any data type, any protocol, any location, you're going to have access to your data the way you want it, where you want it, how you want it. And that can be object storage, that can be what we call a virtual private storage array. You will see that wherever your operation may be located and whoever may need to get access to this data, all running along the bottom of this chart, they can in fact get access to it. And you can have your enterprise data cloud or clouds stored on-prem. You can have them at your service provider. If you're a service provider, you can have them on your data center, of course. And then we are adjacent to the hyperscale public clouds, and we connect in through Direct Connect and things like that. And so really nothing about Zadara Managed Enterprise Data Cloud will strike you as different in your experience of it, of the storage itself. Nothing will strike you as different than the traditional enterprise data storage that you're used to managing, except now it's available anywhere you want it and in any way you want it. And oh, by the way, if you need to change, you need to shift to increase storage, decrease storage, change from let's say a file-based storage to object store. Because it's software-defined storage, you can do that on the fly. So it's about enterprise control and about cloud agility. Andrew, probably no surprise, the list we have here looks a whole lot like the list you provided at the top. And I know that you prepared that list with your team as a review of the market, not as a review of Zadara by any means, right? But Zadara paid attention to the market, right? When we came out, we said, what do people need? How do we need to do this in order to be successful and to make sure that we're satisfying the use cases that we see out there? And one of the things that we ran into over and over again was this notion of I can't, how can I have it all? I can't make trade-offs. Enterprise storage needs to come with all of the features and functions that I'm used to having. And that's why we developed our proprietary software. Because you can't really get all the features and functions unless you're operating in, again, what we call our virtual private storage array, a private environment. And that way, you're really getting, with dedicated resources and all the security associated with that, you're getting the ability to control performance, you're getting the ability to control who has access. You're not running on shared resources, so you don't have to worry about being taken down by noisy neighbors. All of this matters, and then the last bit of it, which we felt was very important, was the notion of the service and the remote monitoring that's proactive, 24/7. I'm going to say it's a funny thing, and we can't get away from this. We see it as a truth in our business. So I will share it here. Many of the customers that come to us, they come to us for the features and functions that they find in the storage. And they don't cite in their entry surveys, they don't cite the service as necessarily a top factor in why they chose Zadara. They chose us, in other words, for the performance, and for the security, and for other features and functions. 6 months in, we ask our customers the same question: what do you value about Zadara? And invariably, the service ranks at the top. And certainly we're very proud of that. And we like to think that's because we've helped people in their journey to see that there's a better way of doing things. They're redeploying resources. They no longer need to pay such close attention to the storage because it's all being managed. And it's really a game changer for them. But in many cases, it's not anticipated, or it's not something that they thought they would take advantage of quite as much going into it as they in fact end up doing. And we're proud of that. We like that. So that's a little bit about Zadara, a little bit about how we do business, how we go about solving the questions that, Andrew, you posed in today's talk, and helped shed some light on in today's talk with all of the data and the information you provided. I want to thank you again, Andrew. Thanks very much for the presentation today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me again. It's been great doing it with you.
Thank you. And it's been a fun conversation. I don't want the conversation to end, so I thought what we would do, like I promised at the top of this, is we'll take some questions. We have a little bit of time left over. What I'd like to do is see if we can give everybody a few minutes back. I know we're all busy, we probably have the next thing we'd like to get onto, but I'd like to take time to answer a few questions. So if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A panel, right, in the GoToWebinar interface. And by the way, what you're seeing on the screen here, I should point out, this is an IDC Vendor Spotlight report. You're going to find some of the things we talked about today in this report. You're also going to find some things we didn't talk about today. So if you get an opportunity, please do download the report. I think you'll find it interesting. It's got some terrific background data and some terrific information in there about the market and what's happening, and could be a good roadmap for you. All right, let's answer some questions, Andrew. There was a question here about COVID-19. I guess it's no surprise, it's on all of our minds. You mentioned that you're seeing people are flat or going up in terms of their buying intent. Do you see that as a broader shift? Is that just part of a broader shift to public cloud and the service model, or do you think there's something more short-term driving
it? I guess my answer would be a combination of both. So I think that in the short term, at least in the markets that I've kind of focused on, so some of the storage related use cases, archive, data protection, and then cloud storage in general. I think in the short term, the overall impact of COVID-19 has been kind of a acceleration of adoption, really. And that's kind of that's where a lot of the counterintuitiveness of our forecast has kind of had us answering a lot of questions, because the question is why aren't these markets declining like so many other technology markets are? But I mean, we're a couple quarters in now, so we've had some Q1 and Q2 data to look at in terms of how vendors are performing, how buyers are reacting. And so I guess we can say today that I think COVID-19 is, especially in some of the storage related, cloud storage related segments, has had a short-term positive impact.
Yeah, I think
which is completely counterintuitive to say. You know, I think it definitely depends. You're talking, I mean, if you dig into it, you can identify some areas where this is not true in specific industries, hospitality, airlines, right? Their budgets are hardly moving in any direction in terms of adoption. But then when you look at other industries, gaming, online collaboration, content streaming, you know, that's where we're seeing increased demand for public cloud services, or for cloud services in general.
Yeah, and so what I see happening, I think what I take away from this question is, you know, there may be short-term impacts for sure, and some of them are positive, like you say. I agree with you. But the thing that interests me most about this, and your research revealed this, is that it's really just accelerating a long-term trend. And I say that because I think it should give us also a little bit of comfort, right? These are uncertain times, but what we're seeing is that we've been on the right path the last few years. The idea of moving to as a service does have real benefits. COVID-19 may be amplifying some of the conditions for moving, and it may be showing us that those benefits are very real. But what I'm not seeing is a shift or in direction. I'm not seeing a shift in the script. I think that gives me confidence that we're doing, all of us as an industry, we're doing the right thing here.
Yeah, well put.
Thank you. And so there's another question. It's about Zadara question. It's about the minimum size of storage that we can provide. We provide storage. I said this won't be a nuts and bolts discussion, so I'll keep it brief. We provide storage of, as you can imagine, up into the petabytes for some of our customers. You saw some of the names at the top. We have some enormous customers, but we do start small as well, because you actually provision drives, and those drives are yours and yours alone. Then the minimum size of our storage is going to be tied to the size of the drives. We do have all flash arrays available. We have 7.68 or 8 gigabyte drives available there, and 14 terabyte. I'm sorry, did I say gigabyte? 14 terabyte on the hard drives, and you can get a mix as well. And I encourage you, if you're curious about our storage and how it works at a more granular level, go check out our website at zadara.com. I think you'll find lots of good info there. You even find a sizing tool in our pricing section that'll help you get an idea of what kinds of storage you can provision, and roughly what you might pay for that. So I hope that will be helpful to folks out there who may be curious taking the next step. All right, there's a question here about what kinds of enterprise features and functions they should be looking for. And I realize because this is not a nuts and bolts presentation, I'll mention a few here. Again, I would encourage you to go to the website, and Andrew, you can tell me these things. You're no doubt seeing some of these things as well. We hear people asking for the following. They want to know that they have data protection, that there's data protection features built in, and that may include things like we offer, and other vendors may offer. I don't know, but we offer remote mirroring, snapshots. We have an integrated backup to object store capability, and then of course we integrate with backup vendors like Zerto, Asigra, Commvault, and Veeam. Doing a bunch with Veeam lately, and it's no surprise people typically will come to an as a service vendor like us with a particular workload in mind. Andrew, I don't know if you're seeing this in your research, but people are sort of putting a toe in the water, if you will, right, when it comes to as a service. And we actually encourage that. We recommend it. There's really no better way, we think, than to be specific in your storage requirements. Get started with your vendor using that specific use case and requirement as a test and a first pass at what you're trying to do, and see if you get the benefits. What we find, and I'm proud to share this stat because it's a good one, I think. It's an interesting one. Our customers typically will grow their storage with us 5x in the first year. And that's not because their storage needs are growing 5x. You reported exactly how storage needs are growing. What was the number, Andrew? Was it 30%, 40%?
Yep, 30 to 40%.
Yeah, and that's what we see too, just overall, right, in terms of our customer base. So why are their storage requirements with us growing 5x in the first year? Well, of course, we're happy to see it, and it's because they trust us and they move more workloads onto our service. And those workloads very typically start, by the way, with a backup workload. It's not the sexiest thing, but we think it's important that people pay more attention to backup. Maybe you see this, Andrew. You may have related research, in other words. Backups, planning for your backups a little bit like doing your homework, and a lot of people don't want to do it. But a good backup plan, well implemented, is worth its weight in gold. And I'm curious if you have stats on that, if you've seen.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking about especially the adoption trends that we've seen are just that kind of what you would typically associate with the cheap and deep object storage use cases. It's usually backup or archive because these are storage related tasks that a lot of organizations either don't have the time or the budget to do, and they can easily rely on a services provider to help them do it quicker and more effective in a lot of ways. So that's kind of those have become the table stakes services that customers will look to adopt initially. And then you get into more complex things like multi-protocol access, where you can add a file-based workload into your storage environment, right? Now you're talking about more higher performance applications. Maybe you're adding in containers or accelerated compute, analytics. That's where things branch out in a multitude of directions from there. And it's that's when you start digging into what's in the service provider's portfolio.
Yeah, that's exactly true, isn't it? That you really begin to branch out, and you should take a close look. I know we're getting near the end of our time together, so I would encourage everybody, take a close look at any vendors you might be evaluating. Make sure that they can not only satisfy your needs today, but help you on your entire journey and your roadmap. Because you know what your needs are, and you know what your needs are going to be going forward. So make sure that any vendor you're evaluating can tick all those boxes. Needless to say, I'm happy to report Zadara does, in fact, do all that stuff. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd encourage you to please come check us out. I like to joke, the closer you look at Zadara, the better we appear. And you know, there's a serious side to that joke, obviously, which is we know the requirements around enterprise storage are serious. They're complex and multifaceted, and we're proud that we're able to satisfy so many of them. Andrew, I want to thank you again for our time together today. I've learned a bunch, as I always do, and I hope everybody on today's call has as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
All right, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. So glad you could be with us for today's webinar. We look forward to having you join us at the next one. Thanks. Bye-bye.